Hello and welcome. So, we're about to start chapter 10, but there are a couple of relevant backstory elements that I want to discuss before we start. Yesterday we talked about the secret organization that wants to assassinate Nikki. The link is in the description. And today we're going to discuss the Pigeon Kingdom's puppet government, which is run by Mercury in the shadows. In the Pigeon Kingdom, there are two pillars of power. The first pillar is the monarchy, which is Queen Ophelia and her family. And the second pillar of power is the Church of Glory, headed by the Glory's priests. Here it reads, "In this country ruled by Glory, Glory's priest was in power as a sect. Believers believed that his judgment was the will of God." There are two other influential forces that control power in the Pigeon Kingdom. The first is the aristocracy, and the second is the common citizenry. Mercury usurps the Pigeon Kingdom government by taking control of all four sources of power: the monarchy, the Church of Glory, the aristocracy, and the citizenry. The story of his usurpation is told entirely in the Mercury Elves Elegy reflection. Mercury was able to relatively easily usurp the Pigeon government for two reasons. First, the king, Mercury's and Ophelia's father, was a dissolute, selfish, and cruel man. He plundered the riches of the kingdom to grow his own wealth, and now the kingdom and its citizens languish. He also used heavy-handed strongman tactics to control the nation. He was very much disliked by his subjects. The second reason that Mercury could relatively easily usurp the government was because the nation of Pigeon Kingdom followed the church with blind faith. As a society, they based their decisions on religious faith without analysis, reasoning, or understanding. Mercury began by infiltrating both the church and the aristocracy. With the aristocracy, he came to them with the power and riches of an extremely successful Apple Federation businessman. Even though they were still arrogant with ideas of their noble ancestry, they still accepted him because of his money and his power. He infiltrated the church by installing his own men within positions of power in the church. The high priest in the Church of Glory, who is second only to Glory's priest, answers not to God, but to Mercury. Then Mercury began a campaign of escalation within the nation. He fueled the anger of the citizens with whispers, and he helped plan a rebellion using covert operatives. Mercury's plan reached its culmination in the rainy month of May when he was 126 years old. 116 years had passed since he had been discarded with antipathy. That's the covert operatives. 116 years had passed since he had been discarded with antipathy at 10 years old, the illegitimate son of the king by a human mistress. Mercury, not the king, at 10 years old, had been sentenced sinful by the bishop of the Church of Glory as the evidence against the king, and he was driven out of the capital. 116 years later, on a rainy day in May, he returned to the Pigeon capital, where he was welcomed by the aristocracy who were ignorant of his history. He had already wooed them and won them with his riches. As they dined that night at court, the rebellion outside began. The guards rushed to fight the rebels outside, and Mercury went to the king's palace, which was poorly guarded. The king finally recognized him as Mercury, his illegitimate son now grown, and returned. He thought at first that Mercury had come to help him. He said, "Since you're here in Pigeon to help me at this time, I'm willing to accept you again." Mercury sneered and replied, "Before that, there's one more thing I must do." And he stabbed his father and killed him, the king of Pigeon Kingdom. And with her father dead, Ophelia would become the new queen. Mercury had not only planned the beginning of the rebellion, he had also planned the end of the rebellion. The uprising of the people had served Mercury's purpose in hastening the reign of a new monarch, his sister, Ophelia. Mercury had gained control of the citizenry, the aristocracy, and the monarchy. All that was left was the church. With the unrest, the riot, and the death of the king, it was easy to cast doubt on the glorious priest. The high priest, second to the glorious priest, but bound to Mercury and not to the church, declared before the people, the glorious priest can no longer communicate with the gods. He's abandoned. The king was stabbed in the heart by the grim reaper. The god didn't abandon Pigeon, but the glorious priest obscured his light and let Pigeon be shrouded in darkness. Ophelia asks the glorious priest to prove his innocence. The high priest suggests that they should be judged by the divine and allowed to sink into the sacred water. Those who float up are innocent, while those who sink should drown. The glorious priest agrees to this test. The glorious priest and the high priest pray to the gods, and then they are tied and thrown into the sacred lake. The high priest rose to the surface, while glorious priest sank to the bottom of the lake. The crowd on the shore screamed and howled, but it was all a trick. Mercury had everything prepared so that the glorious priest would sink and his chosen priest would safely rise to the surface. On the day of Ophelia's coronation ceremony at the end of the month of May, Mercury reveals to her that he's her beloved brother from their childhood. He says, "Let's change this country together." And even though Ophelia is one of the very few people whom Mercury genuinely has affection for, he still escorts her in the dress that he made for her coronation to her royal cage and surrounds her with ministers, aristocrats, and a glorious priest who are all loyal to him. She would be his pawn on the throne and his doll for issuing decrees. And that is the story of Pigeon Kingdom's puppet government. And we're ready for chapter 10. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.